Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Webb, and I'm a marketing director here at Churn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled How to Have Better Goal-Setting Discussions with Your Manager Using Strategies from the Chief Customer Officer Playbook. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording today's session, and a link will be available tomorrow. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to submit your questions via the Q&A tab at the bottom of your webinar screen, and we'll address as many of those questions as we can at the end of this webinar. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you our speaker today. We have Rod Cherkas. Rod is the CEO of the strategy consulting firm Hello CCO, and is a well-respected consultant and advisor to chief customer officers and their post-sale leaders. He has been a post-sale executive at several of Silicon Valley's most customer-centric companies, including Intuit, RingCentral, and Marketo. He is also the author of the new book, The Chief Customer Officer Playbook, 8 Strategies That Will Accelerate Your Career and Win You a Seat at the Executive Table, which you will all be able to purchase on Amazon. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rod.
Thank you very much. So have you ever felt out of balance? And I also will ask, have any of you had any sibling rivalry? Raise your hand if that's happened to you and you feel that way. Well, a couple of summers ago, my brother Michael here in the tan hat came out to visit me in California, and I took him to Lake Tahoe. And I was trying to show him that his big brother still got it. And so I took him out on a boat, and we went tubing, and I was getting pulled 100 miles an hour on the back of a boat, up and down, bump, 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 bump. And it was tons of fun, right? Well, so it turns out that the next day I got vertigo. And if any of you have had vertigo, you might know that vertigo is when you're very dizzy and you feel out of balance. And I had vertigo for 2 weeks. I was actually dizzy for 2 weeks. And I've had vertigo before, and I should have known that. And even the name on the inner tube, Airhead, should have given me a hint that I was going to have a problem. Well, the reason that I'm telling you this story is that it's likely that many of us have felt out of balance sometime in the past 3 years due to the pandemic, to work at home or work in an office, or things going on in your family. And so we're going to talk today about a couple of tools and resources that I want to make available to you to help you get your life back in balance and to help you economy-proof your career. So I'd like everybody to just take a minute and either write in the chat or write something down that maybe has gotten you out of balance in the past couple of years. Just take a minute to think about it. We'll come back to that later. All right. So if you have a chance to think through that. So did you know that the CCO role is the 7th fastest growing executive position that's tracked on LinkedIn out of more than 50 C-level positions? But one of the challenges is that there's only a little more than 4,000 chief customer officers in the whole world, compared to over 50,000 chief marketing officers, over 200,000 chief financial officers. And so you can see where companies are focusing their resources and investment. So there's a lot of place for all of us in post-sale leadership roles to grow. It's a very popular, a popular position. And so I just wrote a book called The Chief Customer Officer Playbook that outlines a set of strategies to help chief customer officers and people that aspire to be chief customer officers develop and master the skills that they need to be successful in their career. And we're going to talk about a couple of them today, and give you some examples that you can use in your daily life. And importantly, you'll be able to talk about some of these skills and strategies in the context of having discussions with your manager or your CEO as you're having your performance review discussions and your goal setting discussions, over the coming weeks and maybe the next month or two. And I'll give you, in a moment, I'll share with you a link that you can download a template that you can use as a resource for that. So before we get started, I wanted to talk about a tool that I've introduced called the CCO odometer. And the CCO odometer is a resource that you can use to measure your ability to deliver repeatable results in your business, both the skills and strategies that you will have, and also the perception that your manager or that your CEO has about your ability to deliver these repeatable results. So I'm going to take you through each of the different stages along the CCO odometer. So the first stage is what I call the stage of uncertainty. And you know that you're in this stage when you're operating in a way that's reactive, your processes aren't very well defined. It's even possible that your CEO and manager don't know what you do and don't know what the metrics are that you're delivering against. You may have very little visibility to the results in your business. And in a lot of cases, your processes are still quite undefined and you're basically reacting to what's happening. So as you move along, the next stage that you might get to is the stage of optimism. And in this stage, you're starting to develop a plan. You've got strategies. Maybe you haven't tried them before, but at least you've got some initiatives that you're putting in place. You're aware of what your business needs and what your customers need, and you're starting to take action. You're not quite sure if those initiatives and actions you're taking are going to work, but you're starting to take actions. You're curious about best practices, so maybe you're starting to talk with peers and introduce things that you can try in your business and see what you're learning and starts to work. And you start to have visibility to results, and you're also maybe starting to document your processes. So these are some of the characteristics that you might have if you're in the stage of optimism. The next stage you've moved to is the stage of competence. And in this stage, you're starting to be proactive. You're starting to think about what's happening in the future, and you understand what are some of the levers that you can drive to get the outcomes that you want in your business. At this point, your CEO and the executive team is starting to believe that the work you're doing is contributing to the results, and you're starting to move the needle on key initiatives and key outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. And you're starting to see results. So in some cases, your results may be really strong, but you also may find that it's coming from a lot of hard work and sweat labor that you're putting in. The last stage is the stage of reliability. And at this point, your CEO and your executive team feel like you're a rock. You've got a plan, you're executing against it, you're applying best practices, you've got visibility to the results that are coming into your business, and you're able to do these things without necessarily being told. You're also starting to see that the results that your team is driving contribute to your company's outcomes. And so in a lot of cases, this is where you want to be. You want to be able to move to the right stage, to the right part of the CCO odometer. So I'd like to ask everybody to put in a chat. Corey is going to bring up a poll of where would you put yourself now on the CCO odometer? Which of these 4 stages do you see yourself at? This is a private poll, so it's not going to be associated with your name, but if you could just sort of indicate where you think you are in your business.
When answers come in, I'll give just a few more seconds for folks to respond. And then I will share the results out. Awesome. Okay, let me share the results. It looks like optimism is where the majority of folks land.
Excellent. Well, thank you for doing that. Let me pull that off my screen. Great. And so what I'd like you to do next is we're going to have another poll of where would you like to be at the end of the year. So if you start to, you develop, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the tools and resources that you should be thinking about to move to the right side. But where would you like to be by the end of the year?
Give it a few more seconds.
All right. Great.
The majority of folks landed in reliability and competence.
Yeah, so it felt like in the in the first poll, there were a good number of you that were in uncertainty and optimism. And it seems like over the course of the year, you'd like to be able to move more toward competence and reliability. Well, I agree. And the good thing is we're going to talk today about some resources that you can use, including tools from the Chief Customer Playbook to help you get there. Because as you think about your own career, the skills that you want to develop, you want to be able to move along on the CCO odometer so that you can be seen as somebody who's both competent and delivering reliable results, because that's what your executives are actually looking for, right? If you deliver great results, but they don't believe that you can do it in the next quarter or the next fiscal year, then they may actually start to think that maybe you just got lucky. And what we're going to talk about today are some of the strategies that I describe in the CCO Playbook to help you build a core set of skills so that you can more confidently move to the right set of those stages on the chart. So in the Chief Customer Playbook, I talk about and introduce the concept of a Chief Customer Officer maturity model that outlines 8 different skills and strategies that through my work with clients, my experience, and my research, that CCOs and aspiring CCOs need to develop and master in order to be able to be successful in achieving the goals that they want and to become more of that reliable executive on the executive team. So I'm going to very briefly go through these 8, and then we're going to talk about 3 of them in a little bit more detail. I'm going to start on the top right of customer connections. So one of the key skills is your ability to have strong relationships with customers and to be able to be an advocate for your customer organizations back into your company at all different levels of the organization. The next one is around thought leader. The next skill is thought leadership, which is your ability to share information that you know, things that work well, things that don't, stories you can tell, and be able to share that with different stakeholders. I'll go into more detail about that in a couple of minutes. The next one is to be able to lead change management when companies are growing. And many of us felt that over the last couple of years. How do you plan ahead? How do you balance delivering in your short term while making sure you're improving and putting in place initiatives so that 6 months from now, 12 months from now, your company is able to also successfully execute? Strategic thinking is the ability for you to contribute to your strategic planning, to be able to adjust quickly as things are happening in your market, competitive wise or with customers. You'll potentially be involved in budgeting and your offsites. And so how do you effectively do your strategic planning? The next one at the bottom left is maximizing opportunities during economic uncertainty. So a lot of us are going through this for the first time, where we're dealing with businesses that may not be growing, or you need to find ways to automate because you can't hire the people that you need. Maybe your company is experiencing layoffs. And this is definitely a set of skills to develop. I talk about them in the book. And there's lots of things that you can be paying attention to as we're all going through this together. Optimizing metrics that matter relates to your ability to deliver against the core metrics that your executive team needs from you. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes as well. The next is cross-functional relationships. So the ability to build relationships with your executive peers to drive cross-functional initiatives across the company and basically contribute at that executive level. And the last one is around communicating and storytelling. So you have a lot of different audiences that you touch, whether it's your customers, your employees, your peers, your executive team, your board. And so how do you share the right level of information that they need so that they understand what you do and how you can influence them? And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So thanks for that. So one of the first areas that we focus on, I'm just going to spend a minute here, is to make sure that you understand the importance of delivering against the metrics that matter. Now, we have a very diverse audience on the call, and you all may have very different different outcomes that you need to deliver against. But there are a couple of core concepts, and there are lots of examples in the book about, how to deliver against them, of making sure that you are understanding the key levers in your business and know your numbers. So it's potentially important for you to build a relationship with your CFO or your finance partner, where even if you're not super strong in this area, it's really important. And I found through my research that a lot of CCOs, when they say, hey, what was the most important skill to develop? It was really around understanding those numbers, not just so they can deliver against them, but so that they understood the levers. I would say another area you can see in these little Post-its at the bottom is to be able to connect the dots between the work that you do and the measurable outcomes that you achieve. Making sure that people understand that so that they don't think you're just doing lots of things, but what are the key levers that are driving those financial outcomes. And then lastly, I would highlight the importance of prioritizing. There are a lot of metrics that you may be tracking, and to be able to understand what are some of the input metrics, what are sort of the things that you do that drive other metrics, and making sure that as you become more of a leader and an executive, that you're focusing more on the outcome metrics. What are the things that your company and your board care about? And then there's lots of things that you do that you can be tracking that are indicators of that. So what I'd like to do next is to go into more detail about one of these skills that I talk about in the CCO Playbook, which is around creating and sharing thought leadership. So thought leadership can come across in a number of different ways, right? And it's really the ability for you to share information that you know, and that you may be an expert, or you may just have a point of view about. Thought leadership does not need to be like earth-shattering. All of us can be thought leaders in our own ways as we think about how we share that information with our direct reports, with our management team, with our leaders, with our customers in our community. So in the book, I talk about a number of ways that you can develop this for your customer-facing organizations, and I'm going to just highlight a couple here. So one of the ways that you can do this is through sharing thought leadership, to your peers and your peer community. And a really good example is me. I've been an operator at companies for, well over a decade, almost 20 years. And when I started my consulting business, I didn't really think of myself as a thought leader. I would do these things and share information with my own management team, and I do lots of internal trainings and stuff. And when I started, it was important for me. And I liked sharing because I had a point of view that I thought was important. And I didn't have a particularly big audience. And so like 2 years ago, the example is I would write some things on LinkedIn, and I would get 24 likes and 5 comments, and started to accumulate a decent number of followers. And then over time, last week, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about getting my author copy of my book. And, I'd been developing this reputation of having good things to say and lots of people that would be interested in hearing what I had to say. And I got like 1,000 likes and 400 comments. And I was really excited about that, but it takes a lot of work. But it's a really good example of how, if you put your mind to it, you can start to share information in different ways. But this is not the only way that you can be a thought leader. One of my clients, Monica, at Building Engines, she has things that she'd like to be able to share. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. Doing webinars like this. There are podcasts in the customer success and professional services and education community. And that's just one way. And this provides a lot of value, not just to your audience that you're talking to, but it's also a great way to develop skills around public speaking, around communicating clearly, around thinking about how to talk to the right level of detail for your audience. And it also potentially creates visibility to your managers and other executives that you have at your company, so that they start to see that you are contributing to the fact that both Monica individually, but also Building Engines in this case, is having a point of view and is seen as a leader in the business. So there can be a lot of benefits to you developing different ways of communicating to your audiences. Another way that you can do that is to take opportunities to share your thoughts at things like meetups or customer events. And in this situation, you may take an opportunity in a lot of cities around the country and around the world. They'll have local gatherings of peers, and they're often looking for speakers. And so you can look for ways to share something that you're learning. You may find other ways that you can do this at customer events or small groups. So the key takeaway here is, as you develop as a leader at your company and in your career, to think about the benefits of taking opportunities to share what you know, and best practices are always people that are interested in learning. And I would encourage you not to worry about like, is this earth-shattering, to just use this as a way to practice. So before I move on, I'd like everybody to put in chat, what's an example of something that you've done in the last maybe 3 or 6 months that, given our discussion today, you might think of as thought leadership. It could be something you did externally to with customers, to peers, even at your company, sharing a point of view. Corey,
Yeah, someone said an ROI calculator, being a part of a panel, sharing ideas with executives, a customer maturity assessment, restructuring contacts, lots of stuff coming in. Led a webinar, advisory board, joined an advisory board, building customer journeys.
Yeah.
Commenting on relevant LinkedIn posts. Participating as a guest of CS podcast.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, these are great examples. And I want to reinforce to you, whatever level you are in your organization, you can be finding ways to communicate appropriately, right? Like being a thought leader does not mean that you are, a keynote speaker at a company conference. A lot of times that may make you nervous, but if you start to do these things, you'll increase your confidence that what you're saying is important and that your audience is interested in what you're hearing and what you're saying, right? So the next skill that I'd like to talk about, and there's a whole section in the book around this, is the importance of being able to be an effective communicator to the various audiences that as a CCO or an aspiring CCO, you need to be talking to. So I'm not here wearing like a red nose, but the point of this is that, as a leader, you can be thinking about, who is the audience that you're talking to and what is the right way to get your information across. And in this case, they're thinking about, how do you make it visual? And you're talking about kids in an audience. So we're going to talk about a couple of skills that may give you ideas about how you can improve your ability to communicate effectively. So one of them, I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to take about 15 minutes at our company's revenue sales kickoff to be able to talk about our customer journey. And I thought about, well, I could put together a bunch of slides and talk about all the different steps in our customer journey. But what was going to happen is the customer experience stuff kind of came at the end of the sales conference, and people would have been sitting in their seats watching PowerPoints for a couple of days. And I tried to come up with a way that would be much more engaging and much more memorable, because as sort of a speaker and communicating information, kind of being boring can be pretty dangerous, particularly at the end, if you're at the end. And so I put together this concept of doing a skit where me and some of the folks on my team and some of the recognizable sales leaders participated in a skit where we basically acted out. It was sort of like, on the yellow brick road to Oz, although it was purple and it had a little Willy Wonka theme because Marketo's color were purple. But anyway, the analogy didn't exactly work, but the concept was really funny. And we basically created a way that the audience could understand what our customer journey was from sort of pre-sales all the way through being a customer and renewal and expansion in a pretty memorable way. So you don't necessarily need to do skits, but I would encourage you to think about how you use the value of, being entertaining, get your key messages across, and also the importance of telling stories. And there's a lot of examples in my book about ways that you can communicate effectively to the various audiences. In this case, it was peers and, employees at a company. Another example is one of my friends, Star Hofer, who joined PartnerStack. They're a software company that makes software for partner management. It's sort of like a CRM for managing partners. And she had joined as a vice president. And she had known that one of her superpowers was the ability to tell stories. And I talk about some of these, some of her experiences in the book. But she was, sort of constantly told by her executive team to, not use to not really use her storytelling skills. It was a little bit more presentation. And so she got to the point where she's like, you know what, this is my superpower. I need to be able to do this. And she asked for opportunities at every all hands to be able to tell some story about a customer and to be able to bring in how the company came together, how different team members and resources a company came together to help deliver against this goal. And that was really effective. And she felt good about it. And so, that was just one way that she was able to tell stories to get across her key points to the various audiences at an otherwise, potentially boring, PowerPoint all hands. And as a customer leader, it's also a great way that she can represent the views and experiences of their customers into the organization. The other thing to think about that Star was very good at was thinking about what's the right level of detail for this particular audience, because not everybody is as familiar when you're talking at a company all hands about what her teams actually do and what the customer experiences are. So it gave her opportunities to think about that. And within 2 years, she was promoted to Chief Customer Officer, and she attributes this ability to be an effective storyteller, an effective communicator of information to her audiences as a key contributor to her getting promoted. Right. And lastly, I want to just also have you think about opportunities that you have to present to your executive team or your CEO staff, and in some cases, to your board of directors, and what level of detail they might be interested in. Because a lot of times they just want to hear the key takeaways. And you might be so used to talking about all of the details in your organization and all the details of particular customers, particular renewals, particular challenges, that you kind of forget that this is, that the board of directors, your CEO, they want just high level details. Often they may want, in an appendix if you have lots of information, but just what is the information that they need to know? And another takeaway might be they're often looking at you and thinking about those interactions that you have as a little bit of an audition, right? Are you the type of person that they would like to invite to participate at some point on that executive staff, or to be able to come and talk to the board? And so you can think about the opportunities that you have to share your information and talk at the right level for that. So before we move on, I'd like to ask again in the chat if you can think about maybe an opportunity that you have in the next 3 to 6 months to come up with, an opportunity for, communicating and storytelling. What's something that you think you could do in the next couple of months to share your information, to share stories?
Open board meeting discussions on renewals this week. So that's exciting. A customer journey skit. Someone said writing a blog, present at a client conference, proactive LinkedIn posts, could share journeys, roundtable with clients. What else? Record videos, practicing recording videos.
All great examples. So, as you think about the next couple of months, be looking for ways that you can, practice and develop these skills, or any one of these skills. So what I want to do is kind of go back to where we started with this concept of the CCO maturity model that has these 8 skills and strategies. And the point here is that, if someone said, hey, what are your goals? And your goals might be to increase retention or grow expansion or to, improve health score, whatever you feel like your metrics are, there are different skills and strategies to help achieve them. And I'd invite you to be thinking about, as you work through your business over the course of the year, how can you be taking advantage of, particular skills? So what I'd like you to do is to think about, in a minute, I'll give you a link to some resources that you can download from my website with this maturity model. But what I'd like you to be thinking about is, for each of these different areas, where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of like your, sort of your strengths and competences, right? So for right now, what I'd like you to think about is like, what are 2 of these 8 areas that you feel are particular strengths that maybe you can lean into over the course of the next year? If you could put that in chat, I'd appreciate it, or write it down, right? But the idea is like, I'd like this discussion to be really actionable for you. So what are some of the strengths? Because we're going to talk about how you can then use this in your performance discussions and your goal setting discussions in a couple of minutes. Corey, what are some of the examples?
Yeah, some folks are saying customer connections, cross-functional relationships, a lot of cross-functional relationships, customer connections, which I think makes sense for the role. Storytelling, strategic thinking, thought leadership.
Excellent. All right. So when you download this resource from my website, think about how you would, identify your strengths. Put little dots where you are around each of these 8 areas. And then what I'd like you to do is think about, like, where do you want to be? What are some of the skills that you can be working on over the course of the next year, so that you can improve in some of these key areas and help you develop in your career, so that you can be moving along on that CCO odometer. So next, what I'd like you to do is, in the chat, put in 2 areas where maybe you're not as strong or you'd like to develop more of over the coming year.
Data analysis, someone said. Metrics. Optimize metrics that matter. A lot of metrics.
Yeah.
Customer connection, storytelling. The majority seems metrics driven.
Yeah. So the metrics are definitely important, because, without delivering against the metrics that you need, it is often hard to, grow in your career and get promoted if you're, consistently underperforming. But in order to achieve those metrics, I would argue that the other skills here will help you deliver against those metrics more effectively. I frequently hear from my clients things like, when I ask them what are their goals for their year, right? Their goals are increase net retention or increase expansion rates. And that would be the equivalent of, asking a sales leader what their goals are. And they came back and said, my goals are to increase sales, right? So yes, those are certainly your goals, but I would also, in your performance discussions, talk about the skills that you can be developing and the strategies that you'll be applying to help you achieve those goals. Because those are certainly like the ways you might be, be metric, like be measured, but regardless, some of that may be outside your control, right? In the last year, your companies aren't growing and customers are pulling back perhaps on their budgets. And so even if you're not achieving those goals, I would encourage you to think about the skills that you can be developing so that as the economy turns around, as your company starts to grow, maybe you join another company, you have the capabilities that you need, sort of the core skills and experiences you need to do that. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the Chief Customer Officer Playbook is how to do that. So let's talk a little bit about kind of where we've been. So we started our discussion by talking about the CCO odometer, which is a measure of, how well you have an ability to deliver against repeatable results in your organization. Not just can you do it in this period, but can you do it consistently? Are you developing a set of skills, sort of a process that if you were interviewing for, another role, or they were your leadership team was thinking about promoting you, that they would say, this individual has a plan and sort of I'm hiring them or I'm promoting them to execute against that plan. And I feel very confident. And you're going to be thinking about how you move from the left side of this chart toward the right side. And how you do that is by thinking about the skills that you can be developing along the year throughout the course of your career that will increase the likelihood that you're going to be able to deliver those repeatable results. Some of it is certainly hard work and sweat, but a lot of it comes from your ability to sort of improve your capabilities in these other 8 areas. And so you want to be thinking about how do you prioritize your strengths so you can lean into them, and how do you prioritize what are some areas that you can be working on. So what I'd like to share next is a template that I've put together that if you go to my website, and I'll put up a link in a minute, that you can download to help you sort of think through having this performance review discussion with your manager. The concept here is that, you are likely to have a sense of your business goals and maybe the metrics and success criteria that your CEO or your manager might be putting in front of you. And it's always good to be able to summarize that for yourself. At the bottom of this template, what I do is I identify these 8 different characteristics, 8 different strategies and skills, and give you an opportunity to think through of what are the ones that that are your strengths, and what are some of the gaps that you might have. And then what is an action plan that you might be able to both think about and execute yourself, or things that you can take action on with the help of your manager, so that they are aware of opportunities and they're keeping an open mind about how they can help support you in your career. And then you can think about, how do you prioritize those? Because it may not be important in the next 3 months or 12 months that you improve in all of these areas, but you might say, hey, I'd like to, get better at communication and storytelling. Are there ways that you can get opportunities to talk at all hands, or, go to customer events and have opportunities to speak, or maybe you'd like to go to conferences and figure out how you communicate in different channels. Or you may say, I'd like to, get more involved in strategic thinking. So how can you be involved in your quarterly offsite planning, or maybe your annual fiscal year discussion? So in the book, it lays out, a number of different, specific activities that you can potentially be thinking about and taking action on in each of these different areas. Lastly, as part of your performance discussions, you can also be talking with your managers about, well, what are the expectations that they would need to see to consider you for expanded scope or potentially promotion to the next level of your organization, or to a chief customer officer role, kind of wherever you are in your career path. And by being able to have that, it's transparent. Now, I would caution you about thinking about this as a promise, right? If you do this, then you will get promoted, but it's at least a way to engage it so that it demonstrates to your manager, your CEO, that you're thinking about it, and that this is sort of a joint agreement about, areas that you can be developing and working on, right? So, key takeaways here is to think about how you prioritize what you focus on, making them like really clear. What are specific things that you can do that are in your control, right? You can, find ways to speak at a customer group, to go to an event, to try and get to an all hands, to share a piece of, thought leadership, even with your team or, externally, whatever those types of things are. There's literally dozens of different examples that you can do. I capture a lot of those in the book. I've talked to several dozen CCOs and, aspiring CCOs about what has helped them in their career and been their career accelerators. And then importantly for your managers and your executive team is to be able to connect the dots between the work that you do and the outcomes you achieve, because our customer-facing functions and the CCO role is still relatively new in the world, and your executives and your CEO and even CFO are not necessarily thinking about like what are all the things that you can be doing as a leader. And so it's important for you to take some of those opportunities to connect the dots between the work that your team does, the initiatives that you're leading, company-wide projects you're driving, and the outcomes that your company cares about, which are often related to revenue growth and profitability. Like fundamentally, that's what it is. Okay. So what I'd encourage you to do is to download some of these resources on my website at rodcherkas.com/resources. You can put it into your browser, take a picture on your phone, it'll take you there to download at least the template for having this performance discussion with your manager. I also have a worksheet around the CCO maturity model that you can download, and then some other resources that I'm sharing, some of my own intellectual property and thought leadership that are in support that you'll see referenced in the book. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is read the book. It's available on Amazon. I'm really excited about it. I'm really proud that it's available. It's a first of its kind resource for people that aspire to be chief customer officers or who are in that role, that gives some really, hopefully thoughtful and very practical advice about what they can be doing to develop the skills that they need to be successful. As I mentioned, I talked to almost 50 leaders about their experiences. I try to tell stories. It wasn't a particularly skill of mine coming in, but I learned through working with some folks who are really good storytellers how to tell stories, and I think you'll find it interesting. And so you can learn more about that by visiting Amazon or clicking on that QR code. And then I'd also encourage you to reach out. Right? Some of you may be interested in having more of a personal dialogue, or, how I can either help you grow in your career or how I can help you in your business, that feel free to reach out and you can chat with me. We can set up a call to talk, but I'd encourage you to think about how to make this actionable. That's kind of my goal, for you over the next year. And I'm really excited about the work that we can be doing together from the resources, from the book, and for those of you that might be interested in talking more. So with that, I'd like to spend a couple minutes in Q&A, and then we'll briefly come back and wrap up some things. So let me turn this back to Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Rod, for walking us through that. We do have a few questions that already came in. I'd like to invite everyone else to go ahead and submit your questions to Rod and in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. So to start off with the first question, it says, I love the idea of identifying and focusing on your strengths with the CCO maturity model. In your experience, do you find it's more impactful when your clients spend most time on and energy on showcasing their top strengths, or would you say CEOs and board of directors find it more valuable to have a minimum level of competency across all 8 areas?
Well, I think that's a great question. And when I work with clients and through my career, I found that there's sort of a base level of competence that, particularly in our customer-facing leadership roles, one needs to have. So if you're a customer-facing leader, you probably have to have some minimum skill set of, being able to interact with and interacting with your clients and being able to be an advocate for them into your organization. You need to be able to, be a strategic thinker and help balance, short-term and long-term. So I would say there's some basic level of competence in all of them, but I also think that it's really important to identify those kind of superpowers, your strengths that make you unique, and build into that. So, I think it's a bit of a balance of identifying those things that you can do well and that, really make a difference to your company and to your own ability to influence your organization. And, figure out what are those different areas that you have a different level of competence. And I also want to point out, it's not super important that you become like a 9 or 10 or each of these areas. One of the things you'll see in the book is this, like, hey, at a manager level, here are the types of things that you should be doing in each of these 8 areas. At a director level, here's the types of things that you should be doing. At a CCO level, right? Like what somebody needs from a C-level executive, what your company needs, is going to be different than how you might be functioning as a director level. And that's okay. This is a set of skills that you're developing over your career, and doesn't mean that you need to be like an expert in all of these. So, think about what are some of those things that you can be building along the way that give you foundations that you'll need as you grow in your career.
I like that. Our next question is an interesting one. It says, if you are a manager of customer success, along with a peer manager of customer success, how do you best position yourself if you're both gunning for a director role?
Yeah, if your company is growing, then there's lots of opportunities to, develop your unique skills and deliver against your results. And also potentially your career is long. So I would encourage you to think about what are the skills that your company needs and that you think that you need to be able to grow in your career, and have that discussion with your manager. And that way they can be looking out for things that are unique for you. When I work with my clients, one of the things that I like to do is to have my client be able to tell from their, sometimes direct reports. If I'm working with a CCO, they have a team of VPs, or if it's a VP, they have a team of directors. Their directors or their direct reports all have different sets of expertise and interests. And so it's not about taking what they're doing and spreading them equally. Sometimes, one of their leaders really has an interest in maybe working with a product, and they want to learn more about the cross-functional relationship with the product team. So if there's an opportunity to help drive the new product release, to be the liaison to your organization for an upcoming product release, they would be the right person to do that. Somebody else might be really great with the finances and analytics, and that may be something that they can do to help drive the creation of reports and dashboards and the communication of information. So I don't know that what happens is like everybody develops the same skill, but you and your manager should be thinking about, what you can be doing to help hone the skills that are important for you in your career, and to get to a base level of competence in those other areas that are important and necessary, but may not distinguish you over time.
Great advice. Let's see. I don't know if others on the call will resonate with this question, but the question says, I'm a new customer success manager in a company who doesn't understand customer success, led by someone who doesn't know customer success. What is your advice for me to be able to grow? I don't know really what I'm doing, and I have no leadership to learn from.
Yeah. Well, perhaps reach out and we can talk about this offline. And that's there's certainly like no easy answer around that. But I have seen from my client experience working with clients and some of the stories that the people that I interviewed and talked to for the book said, is that their ability to tell stories in a compelling way helped others in the organization understand what they do. Right? Your executive team sees lots of, presentations, they see lots of data, but one of the ways that you can help those experiences resonate is through your ability to tell stories. It can be the stories of how your team helps a customer through some transition, how you helped expand a relationship and add new revenue or add a new product line, might be how you helped address some retention or churn opportunity, kind of whatever it is in your experience, but tell it through stories so that they say, oh, okay, if that individual in that team is helping in this way, if another similar situation came along, they would be able to react and execute in that same way. That goes back to that repeatable results. It seems like in that situation, your CEO, your leadership team doesn't have that confidence that what you're doing is leading to those repeatable results. And so you can be thinking about, how you can communicate effectively so that they understand that.
Great. We have a question that says, I'm curious the difference between a chief customer officer and a chief experience officer. Do you see them as the same? If so, is the CCO becoming more common than CXO?
I think so. I talk a little bit about the history of sort of these post-sale executive roles in my book. And at any particular company, it may be just a preference of the CEO or the hiring manager of what they call something as well. So I don't think that there is a big overlay. But, even 15 years ago, there was a role that was often called Chief Experience Officer, and that was often an executive who was responsible for gathering feedback from customers, often in surveys or Net Promoter Score, taking that, trying to interpret it, and then working cross-functionally to improve those experiences. But that executive, from what I had seen, often didn't have the operational teams that they needed to execute. They were responsible for this experience, this sort of outcome metric, this NPS score across the company, but they weren't able to directly manage those. What's happened over time as this chief customer officer role has evolved is it's become an operating executive where they're actually responsible for teams that might include like a professional services or implementation team, success management or partner success management team, a support organization, a customer operations, a customer education team, where they were trying to improve the experiences and the outcomes for customers, but they actually managed the teams that were responsible largely for those outcomes. And yes, you can't always do it themselves, right? You need to work with your product team and your sales team and marketing, but they largely could influence a lot more than they could in the past. In your particular case at your company, don't know the situation, happy to sort of take it offline, see if there's any thought around it. But that's what I've seen in terms of the evolution of this customer experience executive versus a chief customer officer role.
Got it. A little bit of a related question. Given that CCO role is much less common among many other C-level positions, what are some of the indicators that a company is ready to hire their first CCO?
Yeah. So a lot of times what I've seen with my clients that I talk to is they have somebody that is functionally responsible for those outcomes, but is maybe not in a chief level or an executive level role. And that's one of the things that I hope that by reading the book and that listening to the various webinars and reading the thought leadership that I'll be putting out over the course of the year, you'll start to see is what is the difference between being responsible for those teams and operating at an executive level. I heard a lot of stories from folks just like yourself, where you might be a senior director or VP and you're managing all these post-sale teams and even often reporting to a CEO, but your peers might be a chief marketing officer, a chief financial officer, a chief product officer, but you've got a VP title. And it really made people mad, right? Like they didn't understand that. And when I listen to them, I'm like, well, there are a set of skills that you need to be developing to be operating at that executive level. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the book is like, how do you continue to elevate and what does your executive team need? Because it's very different. And so, I think that there is a size of an organization, sort of a scope of a role. Just because you're managing those various post-sale teams doesn't mean that your company is big enough to have a C-level role. What is the impact that you're having on your company's revenue growth and profitability? And, how are you able to influence outcomes at the company to decide, is that a C-level role?
Got it. Our next question is, I get so busy with day-to-day fire drills being a manager, I feel like I never have time to work on my own career development. How do you recommend finding the time to work on these skills?
Yeah. So, as we talked a little bit about today, the work that you do during the course of the year, you should be doing it in a conscious way so that you're building those skills. Right? If you have an opportunity to present, which could be your day-to-day, right? Hopefully you're not spending all your day-to-day in client escalations. That's a sort of, and I talk about this in the book of, as you become an increasingly senior leader, how do you delegate? How do you balance the time that you're spending on like immediate crises of the day versus putting in place improvements that your company needs for the longer term? But even when you're going through these daily crises, you can be thinking about, well, okay, how do I use these escalations with your customers and your interactions to develop skills around being more effective in interacting with customers, taking these each as learning opportunities, sharing back what you've learned from handling an escalation or handling a churn to your organization, right? Because those are actual skills, right? One is developing the skills of building, sort of trusted relationships, even with clients that are unhappy. Like that is a skill to be developed. Another could be, how do you take these learnings, synthesize them, and communicate them back to your organization in a presentation, in an email, in a staff meeting? Like that's a skill. How do you communicate to your executive team some of the trends? Like that's a skill. How do you share those with peers? Like these are all things. So even when you're doing these day to day, if you're conscious, if, like take a look at the template, take a look at some of the materials in the book of like, use the things that you're doing every day and being conscious that these are actually really good skills that will make you more likely to get to that sort of competence and reliability stage on the CCO odometer.
Love that.
Right. We just have a couple of minutes. So I'd like to close before we drop, and with a couple of final thoughts. One is I'd encourage you to download some of these resources from my website. The goal is to make them like very practical, very actionable. Go read the book. Order a copy for yourself and your teams, and think about, what are the skills that you want to be able to develop over the next year. As you have these opportunities for these performance discussions with your manager, whether it's a performance review, go in and be prepared. This isn't a one-way discussion. You can be setting expectations about, hey, these are the areas that I'm really strong at. Do you agree? And here's how I'd like to continue to develop those skills. And maybe, hey, here are some of the areas that I either have gaps or that you'd like to work on over the next year. So your manager can be aware of that. And whether or not you share that template with them and how you fill it out, or whether you just use that as a, as a way to start that discussion, it would be great. And so I really encourage you to, think about your career, regardless of how well your company is doing, over the long term. There are really core skills that will help you economy-proof your career, even during challenging times. Even if your company is not doing well, you can still be developing the skills and strategies that you need to be a rising executive, and hopefully someday a chief customer officer. So please let me know how you go, how things go in your career. Feel free to reach out, and I hope you find the book valuable.
Awesome. Thanks, Rod. Yeah, we've had some folks already say that they went and purchased the book, so that's great. And I did want to remind this group that if you are attending live, that we will be giving away 20 books thanks to Rod. So we'll be doing a random drawing. And if you, Rod reaches out and you're a lucky winner, then congratulations.
Great.
And want to thank everyone for joining us today. There will be a brief survey that pops up at the end of this webinar. And please take just a moment just to provide your feedback so we can continue to build out our thought leadership webinar series. And thank you so much for joining us today, Rod. This was really great content.
Great. Thanks for having me. And we'll communicate with you about the book by tomorrow, so you don't have to wait like a week to see, hey, am I going to get a book before you read it? But I hope you'll find it useful. Great. Thank you so much, Corey. It was great talking with everybody today.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.